government. A single black hearse crossed the tarmac, and a Royal Air Force Guard of Honour moved slowly forward. The Prince of Wales had accompanied the body back from France. Diana's coffin was draped in a royal standard trimmed with an ermine border to signify a member of the royal family. It was a mark of respect, a sign that on this sad occasion she was still to be treated as part of the family, despite her divorce from the prince last year. A line of dignitaries on the tarmac included the Lord Lieutenant of Greater London, Field Marshal Lord Bramall, and the Lord Chamberlain, who has final responsibility for the funeral arrangements. The hearse left for a private mortuary, where the princess will lie until her funeral. We're just now seeing the Prince Charles boarded the aircraft for the 1.5-hour flight to Aberdeen and the drive back to Balmoral to rejoin his sons. It was the end of a day of disbelief. Dawn had not yet broken over Buckingham Palace as people began to arrive to pay their respects, young people grieving for a princess they regarded as their own.
She was young herself, she was fresh, she was, I think she showed that the royal family wasn't something that was still stuck in the 18th century, and she tried to drag it forward.
Some stood before the palace gates and could not contain their tears, some retreated to be alone with their thoughts. And as more flowers were laid, the Scots Guard paid their own moving tribute, and a normally bustling, excited crowd fell silent. Throughout the day, Buckingham Palace seems to have been a focus for the nation's grief, a sign that for so many people the princess remained a member of the royal family and that her extraordinary public popularity had not diminished. And at Kensington Palace, where the princess lived, more flowers and more tears. A nation coming to terms with the unthinkable. At Balmoral Castle in Scotland, where the royal family has been on holiday, Diana's sons, William and Harry, were woken by Prince Charles to be told of their mother's death. They grieved in private here, but at 11:30 precisely, 3 black cars emerged from the castle and crossed the River Dee, the family on its way to church. In the first car, the Queen Mother with the Duke of York, behind them the Prince of Wales seated between his sons, and finally the Queen, dressed in black, with the Duke of Edinburgh. The service in the local church lasted an hour, but not once was the princess mentioned by name. As Prince Charles and his sons left with the rest of the family, Princess Diana's brother was giving his very public and very angry reaction to her death.
This is not a time for recriminations, but for sadness. However, I would say that I always believed the press would kill her in the end. But not even I could imagine that they would take such a direct hand in her death, as seems to be the case. It would appear that every proprietor and editor of every publication that has paid for intrusive and exploitative photographs of her, encouraging greedy and ruthless individuals to risk everything in pursuit of Diana's image, has blood on his hands today.
Britain went into mourning today, united in a sense of grief and shock. Tonight the crowds were still gathering to remember a princess and to reflect on the impact her death will have On a royal family she may have changed forever. Tim Ewart, ITN, Buckingham Palace.
Paris is tonight a city of questions, and the main one is, how could such a tragic accident have occurred? Police have been questioning 7 photographers who pursued the princess's car before it crashed. She was terribly injured. Doctors tried for hours to save her, but they couldn't. Her friend Dodi Al-Fayed died instantly. So did their driver. Mr. Fayed's bodyguard survived. Following today's events in Paris, Bill Neely.
Flanked by an honour guard of French soldiers, the body of Diana, Princess of Wales, leaves a hospital in Paris. A simple white wood coffin draped in the royal standard. This was the end of both fairy tale and tragedy, an end that is still shocking nearly 24 hours on. Minutes before, Prince Charles had arrived to collect the body of his former bride, consoled by French President Jacques Chirac. Inside, he and the princess's 2 sisters spent a few minutes silently with the body before Charles emerged, the strain clearly showing as he thanked officials and doctors for all they had tried to do. Then, in an unmarked and unremarkable vehicle, the woman whose life was so remarkable was driven through Paris for the last time, just 18 hours after the short journey that had caused her death. This is what's left of the Mercedes in which the Princess of Wales and her companion Dodi Al-Fayed were being driven back to his house. Witnesses say the car was being pursued by photographers on motorbikes. Whatever the cause, it's clear that when he entered this tunnel alongside the River Seine, the driver lost control, crashing into a pillar on one side, then with full force into a wall on the other. You'd hardly recognize this as a car, the engine rammed up into the rear passenger area. Miraculously, Diana's bodyguard sitting in the front survived this. Dodi Al-Fayed died instantly in the back seat. The princess, who was sitting alongside, suffered terrible chest injuries. The driver died immediately. At first, ambulance crews managed to keep the princess alive, but her heart had stopped beating by the time she was admitted to hospital. The surgeons fought for 2 hours to restart her heart. At 3 o'clock this morning, London time, they admitted defeat and announced that Diana, Princess of Wales, was dead. Britain's ambassador had been at her bedside.
The death of the Princess of Wales fills us all with deep shock and with deep grief. And our thoughts and our prayers are with her family and her friends.
Near the scene of the accident, French police officers examined motorbikes used by photographers to chase the princess's car. The men who were riding them are still being held for questioning. The accident happened in central Paris, not far from the Eiffel Tower. The couple had left the Ritz Hotel just after midnight. Within seconds, their car was being chased at high speed around the cobblestoned Place de la Concorde. It was heading west along the River Seine when it entered the underpass near the Alma Bridge and crashed. The road at this point rises and falls regularly. As it enters the tunnel, there's a sharp bend and a dip into darkness.
The car was just travelling at such speed, and it was almost as if it was in too high a gear. It really, really was tearing away. I don't know, maybe it was doing at least 80, maybe 100 miles an hour.
At first light, the police began trying to piece together the last moments of what had been a romantic weekend. This is the exact spot where the Princess of Wales's car crashed. The police chalk marks the spot where the car hit the curb. From here, it's thought it flipped over, careered across the road, and hit the tunnel wall on the other side at great speed. Outside, hundreds of Parisians have been leaving flowers, the site already becoming a shrine to a woman much admired in France. Paris, too, is in shock tonight.
I think she was also our princess. That's what we feel in France, but I think it's the same all over the world.
And at the hospital where Diana's body had lain for 18 hours, more flowers and more grief.
Oh, Diana,
this distraught French woman said the Princess of Wales had been her heroine ever since they'd met at a charity in South London. But the charities and the good causes, the glittering balls and the lavish holidays are over now. Diana should have been coming home today to see her 2 sons in London after a summer holiday. Instead, her body was brought home, crushed and broken. It was carried carefully, 8 RAF servicemen bearing it up towards the belly of a plane. She was called today the People's Princess. She wanted to be known as the Queen of Hearts. She will now forever be remembered for her violent, wholly shocking death. The Prince of Wales took her back, calmer now, and the plane left France for England, leaving behind a stunned city and a stunned continent. Diana, Princess of Wales, is dead. Bill Neely, ITN, Paris.
And Bill Neely joins me now from the scene of the accident. Bill, a scene, I'm sure, tinged with great sorrow tonight. What's happening there?
Yes, you join me at the very scene of the accident. The traffic now freely flowing into the tunnel where the Princess of Wales lost her life, about 200 yards from where I'm standing now. I am surrounded by hundreds of people who have really been coming here all day to lay flowers at this area, which, as I said, has become a shrine. Someone has pinned up a Union flag on the bridge. This is a really historic and beautiful spot. Of course, it will now be remembered for something quite different.
Bill, there was some talk today about the possibility, no more than that, of manslaughter charges being brought against those who pursued the princess and didn't come to her aid after the crash. What can you tell us about that?
Well, the police and the state prosecutor are both trying to do just that, and that would be a big change because it would mean that the princess was killed. They have 7 photographers in custody. They have laid charges before a magistrate against 4 of them, but we do not believe at the moment that those charges are manslaughter. And they are questioning 3 others. It's believed most of those 7 came to Paris from the Mediterranean. They followed the princess here in order to take her photograph. And they are concentrating on one photographer who they think may have got in front of the princess's car in order to take a photograph through the windscreen of the princess and Dodi Al Fayed together. Quite how he did that, quite how the car crashed, is still a mystery, but as you said at the beginning, there is a palpable sense of tragedy here in Paris tonight.
Bill Neely in Paris, thank you very much indeed. As news of the death of the princess spread around the country and around the world, tributes poured in from everywhere. Perhaps no one put it better than a shaken Tony Blair. The Prime Minister said she was the people's princess. Our political editor, Michael Bronson, reports.
The whole of Britain has been grieving today. In the morning rain, outside a tiny County Durham church in a village in his constituency, it fell to the Prime Minister, as leader of Her Majesty's government, to try to put that national grief into words.
You know how difficult things were for her from time to time. I'm sure we can only guess at, but the people everywhere, not just here in Britain, everywhere, they kept faith with Princess Diana. They liked her, they loved her. They regarded her as one of the people. She was the people's princess. And that's how she will stay, how she will remain in our hearts and in our memories forever.
For one of those listening, it was too much to bear. For Mr. Blair, too, woken first at 2 in the morning and unable to sleep after that, it had been far from easy. In his tribute in his North Yorkshire constituency, the leader of the opposition, William Hague, spoke of the love and compassion the princess had shown.
The work that she did for so many charitable causes did actually reflect a genuine human warmth and compassion and interest. She had a lot of love for people.
What, Paddy Ashdown was asked, would she be remembered for?
I just don't think it's possible to make that kind of judgment yet. It will need a rather more rational and cool view. I think in the aftermath of this horror and very, very personal tragedy, that's the thing I think we should remember at the moment. Each of us will feel a sense of loss, but let all of us remember that whatever our loss is, it's nothing in comparison to the loss of her family, and I think all other matters can wait until later.
From the Duchess of York, who shared with Diana the pain of the breakup of a marriage, a statement issued by her office. It said, The Duchess has lost someone she has always considered a sister and a best friend. There are no words strong enough to describe the pain in her heart. The world has lost the most compassionate of humanitarians and someone so special whose presence can never be replaced. The news, of course, raced around the world. At British embassies and high commissions here in Washington, flags were lowered to half-mast, and back from around the world came the tributes. President Clinton broke into his New England holiday to pay his respects.
We liked her very much. We admired her work for children, for people with AIDS, for the cause of ending the scourge of landmines in the world, and for her love for her children, William and Harry.
So many of the tributes have focused on the way Diana could talk with and hold and touch the sick and the wounded and the dying. In the past, Mother Teresa of Calcutta saw that for herself. This was her tribute to the princess today.
She had great love for the poor. She was very often anxious to help me to come to know a little more about the poor.
Earlier this year, the princess had a happy meeting with President Mandela of South Africa. Today, he said,
she was undoubtedly one of the best ambassadors of Great Britain, associated with worthy causes.
But back home, here in Britain, in villages and towns like Knowle in Warwickshire, it's not been the words of the great and the good, but the silent prayers and thoughts of millions of ordinary people which have been the greatest tribute. Michael Brunson, ITN, Westminster.
I'm joined now from Westminster by our political editor, Michael Brunson. Michael, there was a hint today that the government does not intend to make any immediate changes to those laws about privacy and intrusion which so concern and connect with this tragic story.
Trevor, that's right. There's a great sense in government that nothing but nothing must be done now in a rush. There must be no feeling of haste within the government, I think, and that's why there's not going to be any special gathering of the cabinet. The way it's being put by one Downing Street source tonight is that the business of government will continue, but politics will stop. And only after a long period of reflection, I think, would anything come forward about the possibility of changing the laws regarding privacy or the laws governing the press. We have a voluntary code at the moment. It's been toughened up. Certainly there'll be a debate, a great debate within the press. None of us, no journalists, myself included, can possibly go through today without thinking through very carefully how we should behave in future and what all this means. But no, the government does not want to rush into anything.
Mike, I take that point, but surely any government which pretends to be listening will have to deal with the revulsion that people feel about the circumstances which may have contributed to this tragic death.
I think the revulsion, perhaps, those issues will come later. What I gather the Prime Minister has been very struck by today is the way that he has sensed that what he was saying earlier about people keeping faith with Diana is, for the moment, the most important thing. And he is struck by the way that the tributes have come from famous people around the world, but from the ordinary people as well. We heard earlier just some ordinary people outside Buckingham Palace expressing their thoughts. And that, I think, for the moment, is going to be sufficient. Yes, there will be the revulsion at what has happened, but that perhaps comes for later. For now, the Prime Minister, like the rest of us, I think, is thinking, just let us have this thing sink in. Let us be with our thoughts for the moment.
Michael Brunson, thank you. The princess died as she'd lived, pursued by photographers. We've already heard the anger the princess's brother Earl Spencer directed at the media, emphatically blaming them for what happened. But as we heard, the government made it clear today that it's much too early to say whether laws on privacy and intrusion should now be reviewed. Our Home Affairs editor Jennifer Nadel reports.
Photographed and followed wherever she went, tonight the focus was firmly on those who pursued her, amid calls for an urgent inquiry into the role of the media.
Mr. Al-Fayed believes that this appalling tragedy would never have happened but for the attentions of these people who I suppose we shall have to call photographers. It was quite appalling what happened, and we're just coming to terms with that.
The European Convention on Human Rights will give a general right to privacy, and calls for tougher measures have so far been rejected in favour of continued self-regulation.
I think there has been concern in Britain, in the press and the media, that there should be a line drawn and that it should be drawn by a responsible press and by responsible media, rather than having it drawn for them by others, with the development of a stronger press complaint system. And I'm certain that that is the right way to go. The paparazzi clearly wouldn't have been pursuing her were it not for the fact that the photographs that she of her that they took earned so much money for them.
Recent photos of the princess in Saint-Tropez sold for hundreds of thousands of pounds. Newspaper editors say legislation wouldn't have quelled the pursuit of the ultimate photo, which could have fetched £1 million.
France has very stringent privacy laws. They were completely ineffective, both at Saint-Tropez and clearly in Paris. The story about the Prince of Wales, the story about the breakup of the royal marriage, was a worldwide story. It had huge market potential in every country in the world. Even if you banned it in one country, the market would still be sufficiently great to ensure that the harassment continued.
And while some argue that those who court publicity shouldn't then be able to shun it, there was some support from within the press for greater protection.
I think a law that draws a distinction between what the public function, the public functions carried out by public people and their private lives. And going out for dinner with your boyfriend, it seems to me, is something that is clearly private. It's no business of anybody else's.
A sentiment clearly supported by mourners gathering at Buckingham Palace earlier today.
But why do they pay so much money for the photographs? Why were the paparazzi after them? If there was no money, in the photographs, they wouldn't have been after her in the tunnel.
And while the government was tonight resisting pressure for an immediate reaction, there were reports from the States that pictures of the fatal crash were being offered for sale to the highest bidder. An opportunity, perhaps, for the press to show whether its attitude has changed. Jennifer Nadel, ITN.
Now to Kensington Palace and to our royal correspondent Nicholas Owen, who's been reporting on today's events since the news first broke. Nick, what's happening there tonight?
Well, this is Kensington Gardens, where we are now. Behind us up there, Kensington Palace, the London home of Diana, Princess of Wales. And as you can see over my shoulder, Trevor, hundreds of people, literally hundreds of people are out here tonight. A place of pilgrimage, that is the only way to describe it. People of all ages, lots of children. And you know, the odd thing to me really is how quiet it really is here. Yes, there's the noise of traffic, London traffic, going on as ever behind us. But in this park, you know, there's a little bit of hubbub, but not much. It's really very, very quiet indeed. And they're going to leave this park open, the police say, until 1 o'clock in the morning. Usually it closes at dusk. What you can't see out there in the darkness, the flowers, masses and masses of flowers, lining railings running all the way up to Kensington Palace behind us there, up to those golden gates. Beyond it, the palace, no lights in the windows there, a sort of shuttered, forlorn, awful look, I have to say there.
Nick, tell us what you know about the funeral arrangements.
Well, it was hoped at one stage, hoped or expected, I should say, that Buckingham Palace would be in a position to announce the funeral arrangements tonight. But they have said in the last hour or so that, in fact, it won't be now until tomorrow morning. Much stress is being laid on the fact that they want full consultations with the family. Now, of course, the royal family are very concerned in this, but there is also very much the feelings of Diana, Princess of Wales's family, her two sisters who accompanied Charles on that terrible journey to Paris to bring back the body of the princess, and also Earl Spencer, her brother, who spoke so angrily today about the activities of the paparazzi and the press, who he said had hounded his sister to death. All those views taken into account. So what sort of funeral we get at the end of it is by no means certain. Presumably it will be a big national event, you know, a state funeral in all but name, probably, in which case a funeral service at Westminster Abbey, followed by burial at St George's Chapel, Windsor. But you know, that can't be taken for granted at the moment. It is possible that it would all be private. Perhaps that's what the families will want. We will have to wait and see. And we also, of course, think so much tonight of William and Harry, the princess's two sons, and the awful tragedy that has befallen them in particular on this awful day, Trevor.
Nick, thank you. Nicholas Owen, reflecting on a tragic day for our nation and for the royal family. Let's take a look now at various aspects of Diana's life and her undoubted achievements. And we begin with the effect she's had on the royal family and the revolutionary changes she brought about. Here's James Mates.
The summer of 1981 and the House of Windsor seemed as secure as it had ever been. The heir to the throne had a bride, the nation had its fairy tale. Into the monarchy had come a young woman of aristocratic background and training who would give the institution youth and sparkle well into the 21st century. Not only that, but within a year there was a male heir as well. Surely no royal house could have its future so clearly and happily mapped out. The new princess was a breath of fresh air, certainly, but more than that, she was changing the whole business of royalty. In came the cameras, going behind the scenes at the family firm. Out went some of the stuffiness, the reserve, the distance, and along came the adoring crowds wherever she went in the world.
She almost single-handedly rejuvenated the monarchy in the 1980s when all was going well, and there was that parade of weddings and births that had the nation almost permanently en fete, and they were on the front pages every day then, but it was all good news, and the family monarchy, which is a 20th century creation, was going strong.
It was more than just a change of style. The shy princess had suddenly turned out to hold very strong views on the future of a 1,000-year-old institution, views she wasn't prepared to change.
I would like a monarchy that has more contact with its people. And I don't mean by riding around bicycles and things like that, but just having a more in-depth understanding. And I don't say that as a criticism to the present monarchy. I just say that as what I see and hear and feel on a daily basis in the role I have chosen for myself.
Most galling of all to the traditionalists, the young princess's views were proving extraordinarily popular. Di mania just wasn't going away. Indeed, it was upstaging, even overshadowing those who'd grown used to centre stage.
I haven't yet worked out a method of splitting my wife in half. She can do both sides.
When Diana came into the royal family, they expected a flurry of publicity for the first few months following the marriage, and then she would fade into the background, and she would be number two, always the supporting act. And that's how it was seen inside the royal family. Well, it didn't happen like that. The whole thing just mushroomed so that Diana very quickly became an international superstar. And there was a degree of jealousy from Prince Charles about that, because he's, as most members of the royal family are, they are quite vain people. They like to be in the spotlight.
That was difficult enough in the early days, but by the time the marriage began falling apart, it became intolerable. Their royal duties began to diverge, but the cameras and the nation's sympathy stayed firmly with the princess. She felt that those around Charles, those she referred to as the establishment, were now actively out to get her.
I don't think many people would want me to be queen. Actually, when I say many people, I mean the establishment that I'm married into, because they've decided that I'm a non-starter.
For all her attempts to carve out a new role for herself on the fringes of and then outside the royal family, those attitudes to her never changed.
That she didn't really fit into the establishment. I think the establishment were always a little bit, to say suspicious, but disparaging about her. And that, of course, increased as time went on, because the establishment will always stay where the power is. And eventually a Prince of Wales who's going to become king, he is the power figure. So to some extent, she was isolated.
But the other thing that never changed was the affection in which she was held by the British people. Affection that moved her to tears in the middle of her marriage breakup. Affection that only grew with her show of stylish defiance the night her husband told the nation he had been unfaithful to her. And that will have its legacy. What began back in 1981 with a magical wedding at St. Paul's has already changed the monarchy, and it will continue doing so, because those ideas held so strongly by the princess about what a modern monarchy should be like have proved to be so popular that they will not be forgotten now that she's gone. James Mates, ITN, at St. Paul's Cathedral.
Joining me now to discuss the princess's effect on the royal family, I'm joined by two royal authors, Andrew Morton and Penny Junor. Andrew Morton, we saw you there in James Mates' report. Can you tell me whether you feel the life of the princess has changed the monarchy and the way it looks at things irrevocably?
Oh, absolutely. If you look back at 1977, the year of the Queen's Silver Jubilee, you saw then a popular royal family, but very much a domestic royal family, a family which was quite dutiful, sober, and rather dull. Diana gave it glamour, style, class, and also an international appeal which it had hitherto lacked. And I think that that's what will be the real problem facing the royal family today. It will, at one leap, it's lost its international constituency. Diana was that aspect of their continuing appeal.
We heard today in that James Mate report talking about herself as an outsider. My question to you is this: might the monarchy, might the palace learn to deal differently with people who consider themselves outsiders but who come into that firm, that family?
I think that in the way that they've treated Sophie Rhys-Jones, who's a long-time girlfriend of Prince Edward, is a testimony to the fact that they realise they've made mistakes, not just with the Princess of Wales, but also with the Duchess of York. And here we have a woman who has largely been out of the limelight. With the Princess of Wales, she always felt that she never had the grooming, the attention, and also the support of either her husband or the royal family. She very much felt alone, vulnerable, and a rather sorrowful figure at Kensington Palace.
Penny Junor, you heard what Andrew Morton said. Do you think the palace, the monarchy, is minded to absorb whatever lessons there might be from the life and death of the princess?
I think that I mean, Andrew's quite right. She did feel that she was never properly groomed or looked after or eased into the job. But I think that the royal family found her very difficult to deal with. I think she did have a lot of problems, which they were ill-equipped to cope with, as I think probably many families would have been ill-equipped to cope with. But also, they were learning for the first time. It was the first time that an outsider had ever married into the family in quite that way.
But likely to happen, possibly, on other occasions, I take it.
I assume, yes.
Likely to happen again.
Yes, quite likely to happen again. I think they have learnt a lot, yes. And I think it's been a very painful experience for them. And I mean, I must say I feel deeply sorry for absolutely everybody concerned today.
So you think that they're minded then to take on board what it needs to deal with people who come from the outside like this?
In so much as they can, but I think Diana, it wasn't just that she was an outsider. I think the pressure of I mean, her character, in a way, was it had defects. I mean, she had bulimia. She had had a difficult childhood herself. So I mean, we are talking about an individual, and maybe another individual coming from outside may not have had those problems.
Penny Junor, Andrew Morton, thank you very much. Let's turn now from Diana, royal princess, to Diana, the tireless charity worker and campaigner. It was a role which in her early days didn't come very easily, but it was one she quietly cultivated, developed, and eventually mastered. Norman Rees reports.
It was one thing that set her apart from other royals, the common touch. She was the people's princess, and in her charity work it showed, especially with children.
I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts, in people's hearts.
From the start, that's what she set out to be. At one stage, patron of more than 100 charities. It was a daunting role for a new princess.
Yes. I think it's all right to go on my own, something like this. It's quite a big occasion. It's a big occasion, but it is for your charity.
She was quick to develop an affinity with the people she met, and they responded to her.
So how long do they work you in here for? Long enough, I suppose.
Long enough, yeah. She was never aloof. She loved to touch and to comfort. As a mother, she instinctively knew a cuddle would do the world of good.
She had such an extraordinary quality of warmth, and she didn't hold back at all. If there was someone who was particularly sick who was keeping in the background, she would know that she would somehow sense that they were there, and she would make her way to them, and she would talk to them and to their parents, and she gave enormous warmth, and she gave these people something that would stay with them all their lives.
And the princess carried that warmth overseas, breaking down prejudice against diseases like leprosy. They were no longer the untouchables.
It's always been my concern to touch people with leprosy, trying to show in a simple action that they are not reviled, nor are we repulsed.
nor was she repulsed by those stricken with HIV and AIDS. Her most enduring breakthrough was to show the world that human contact with sufferers was not something to be shunned. This is one place that Diana, Princess of Wales, often dropped into informally without the presence of cameras. It's the London Lighthouse, a charity that offers counselling and residential care for people with HIV and AIDS. All day long here, they've been taking calls from people distraught at the news. Today, they lit a candle here in memory of the princess. One of the men who works here remembered the day Diana came to his sickbed.
When she shook my hand, she put her hand on my shoulder, and I felt that I think she's a naturally, or she was a naturally, tactile person. It reassured me, you know, that I'm worth something. That might sound a bit corny, but it does. Sometimes you need that reassurance when you're not well.
Following her divorce, the princess concentrated her work on just 6 charities. The homeless was one, and most controversially, her campaign to rid the world of landmines. Her visit to Angola prompted accusations she was becoming embroiled in politics.
I'm only trying to highlight a problem that's going on all around the world. That's all.
Charity workers say Diana felt strongly about the suffering landmines caused among millions.
I think she felt particularly drawn to it. And also there was, and there is, a simple solution to this problem. And I think Diana could see that if she put her name to this, it might give it more chance of getting there.
But children remained her abiding interest. One of her last trips was to Pakistan and the cancer hospital run by her friend Imran Khan. The image she perhaps would most want to be remembered by is one she herself picked out as her favourite for publication only last week. Norman Rees, ITN.
To explore further Diana's influence in her charity role, let's go now to Julia Somerville at Buckingham Palace.
Thank you, Trevor. Well, with me I have John Gray, who's Public Affairs Director of the British Red Cross. And as we saw in that piece we've just been looking at, Diana's role with the Red Cross, particularly with the campaign against landmines, was crucial, really, wasn't it?
Very, very significant and very important. And during this particular year, we have seen change in attitude of governments. A lot of money has been raised for victims. And the profile of our campaign has increased, I would think, 5-fold. In 1996, when the International Committee of the Red Cross was attempting to get landmines high on the agenda, we were having great difficulties and great problems, until we approached the Princess of Wales through Lord Attenborough, who allowed her to come to his film premiere of one of his new films, and from there just took off. And that was only just 10 months ago. So much has been achieved in the last 10 months.
And she was more than a figurehead, wasn't she? She really did seem to play a part.
Indeed, wanted to know what was going on. She wanted to see documentation, took an interest, scheduling, and wanted recce meetings and really got involved in every detail, and not just on the work itself and how she would deal with victims and with those who are leading very difficult lives, but in the organising of the events and what we would do at the events. And recently we've been talking to her office about some events for the future and making plans for those. And her wishes were all making sure we raised more money for more work.
It's going to have a devastating impact, obviously, on you, her loss. How are you going to replace her? You obviously can't replace her.
Well, she's irreplaceable. So the work for Landmine campaign will go on. We intend, hopefully, to continue with the events that she was going to attend in October and November as a tribute to her. We think it's right that we should carry on, and we hope that the campaign will eventually see the global ban of anti-personal landmines, and that we can raise many millions of pounds to help the victims, because the landmines are still there in many countries, laid in the ground, and day by day people are losing limbs and suffering because of them going off. And it's a devastation. And the Princess of Wales meant so much to us, and we're going to miss her terribly.
Indeed. John Gray, thank you very much indeed. Back to you, Trevor.
Julia, thank you. For all the glamour and trappings of royalty, the princess, like millions of other mothers, said her children were the most important part of her life. Tonight, the country's thoughts are with those two princes. To examine Diana's relationship with her sons, Jo Andrews spoke to one of her closest friends.
This was the real centre of Princess Diana's life, her sons, and bringing them up in an utterly loving, warm and often informal atmosphere was her finest achievement. She always wanted them close to her. During a tour of Australia and New Zealand, she made the first firm break with protocol. In the past, royal babies had been left behind. She decided the infant Prince William would come with her. And she was always there for both her sons to the end of her life.
Oh, no.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. William, we love you. The thoughtful friend of the nation of Wales. Love you. God,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Single lilies each, to be laid with the rest. And as they made ready to go into the palace, empty but for memories, the one sure thought that courage, like the people, will not desert them on the morrow. Colin Baker, News at 10.
Over now to our royal correspondent Nicholas Owen at Buckingham Palace. Nick, did the broadcast do the job it was supposed to?
I think so, Trevor. If by that did you mean it turned back the tide of criticism that there seems to have been of the royal family over the last few days, that they're out of touch, that flags weren't flying, that they weren't really showing their grief. I think we saw the Queen speaking, as we were promised, genuinely from the heart. She didn't stumble at all. She's a real professional. That was a live broadcast, but she talked of William and Harry, and she paid a warm tribute to Diana. But I thought one of the most interesting lines, which James Mates mentioned, or James Mates reported on, lessons are to be learned from her life, the Queen said of Diana, and from the extraordinary and moving reaction to her death. And an interesting thing too, you could actually hear the crowd behind her. You could see the huge crowd behind her and hear them, Her Majesty joining in the grief of the nation on television.
And Nick, what are we to make of those scenes tonight?
Well, Trevor, indeed, I can only say it's a foretaste of what is to come tomorrow, of course. The dusk lent the whole thing an amazing feeling, really. That small funeral procession, that hearse, went by here just under 2 hours ago. The Queen Victoria Memorial you see behind me, that's illuminated. Buckingham Palace itself in relative darkness, and the Queen and other senior members of the royal family inside Buckingham Palace preparing themselves, as the rest of the nation are, for tomorrow's funeral.
Nicholas Owen, thank you. With so many people already in central London, one scarcely dares to guess how many there will be in the morning for the funeral itself. Tonight, from every corner of Britain, they're still pouring into the capital. And an abiding image of the funeral and of this entire emotion-filled week will be the flowers left in abundance for the princess. This reports by ITN's Andrew Simmons.
A bright mass of flowers now dwarfing the hundreds of people at the edge of it, built up in 6 overwhelming days. It was here below, behind the gates of Kensington Palace, where Diana, Princess of Wales, used to live. Its approach roads are smothered by bouquets. In contrast to the carefully arranged carpet of flowers laid before Buckingham Palace. So many found it impossible to absorb from pictures and words what has been going on. And that is perhaps why such vast numbers of all ages and backgrounds have come to the royal palaces impulsively to be amongst the sweet scent of these flowers, every bunch of them distinctive for its own individual message. And amongst the people, it is still hard to take in the enormity of it all. Outside the 3 royal palaces, more than 1 million bouquets have been laid. A Buckingham Palace spokesman says all of the flowers will remain in place over the weekend. After that, it's yet to be decided where they'll be taken to. But every single message will be collected and passed on. Tonight, as the crowds flowed through every railway and bus station in the capital, many arriving with no plans on where they would sleep, if they weren't already carrying flowers, they were buying them.
Florists throughout the country have had to rely on huge shipments of imported flowers to replenish stocks running out by the hour, satisfying the extraordinary demand as a tide of people headed to join others. Hundreds had already spent a cold night sleeping on the streets. They had awoken this morning in the hope they will be as close as possible to their beloved princess.
Diana was such a beautiful person. Nobody will ever replace her.
I still can't believe this is happening now. I don't think I'll believe it until I actually see her coffin.
A coffin which will rest on this gun carriage, being prepared here for tomorrow's funeral. Tonight, as London filled with mourners, the spontaneous personal gestures which had been so overwhelming this week will stop in preparation for the sad formality of tomorrow. Andrew Simmons, News at 10, Central London.
The princess isn't, after all, to be buried in the Spencer family vault in the parish church at Great Brington. Her brother, Earl Spencer, announced today that she be laid to rest instead on an island in the grounds of Althorpe, her childhood home. He said her grave could be properly looked after there, and her sons could visit her privately. Reporting from Althorpe, here's Eric McInnes.
The gates of Althorpe, destination of so many mourners, and behind which we now know the princess will finally be laid to rest. It is here on this island, in the centre of the estate's ornamental lake, that Princess Diana's coffin will be brought tomorrow afternoon. It is the family's wish that she be buried here, a place of serene beauty, where her relatives, in particular her two young sons, can come in privacy and pay their respects. While 20 generations have been buried in the village church, the decision is a break with Spencer tradition, a unique arrangement for Princess Diana.
I think it's the right decision for privacy for the princes.
I think that it's good. I think that they should be allowed some private time.
Roads are now closed, large crowds are expected. Some are already in place on the route leading up to the gates. And it is here her coffin will slip from public gaze forever. Tonight, the people are still coming, and it is in anticipation of this public need that the family are considering erecting a memorial outside the gates, allowing people to come whenever they wish to pay their respects. Eric McInnes, News at 10, Althorpe.
Princess Diana was famously generous with her time and friendship, and many of the people in Westminster Abbey tomorrow or lining her funeral route will have known her personally. Caroline Kerr has talked to 3 such people to hear their stories and what they'll be doing and thinking tomorrow morning.
Emma May is a 16-year-old who's just started studying for her A-levels. She'll be in the crowd tomorrow in the Mall. Chris Moon lost an arm and a leg, but he's training to run in a marathon. He'll be at the service inside the Abbey. Eileen Brennan is a ward sister looking after a little girl who's had a kidney transplant. She'll be part of the funeral procession. Diana touched all their lives. She met Eileen here on the left in February when she visited Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital.
For the children, it was like a magical day. They saw her as a princess and they were just excited about all the sparkle. When we were walking around introducing her to all the children, you sort of forgot that she was royal, and she was just like somebody very nice coming to see the children.
Eileen's used to tragedy, but she's unsure how she'll cope tomorrow.
We're used to death and dying and coping with situations like this, but I think this will be unique. And having met Diana, I think it might be a little bit harder.
The princess met Emma May 6 years ago when she was presenting children with an award for bravery. Emma was born with Turner syndrome, a disease which stunted her growth. Diana told her to keep in touch, and she did. For the next 6 years, they wrote to each other regularly. When Emma needed £40,000 for an operation, Diana made a large personal contribution.
She was a friend in every sense of the word, really. I mean, not only did she send me money to help with my leg operation, but she kept in touch, monitoring my progress and giving me lots of support. I can't have children because of my Turner syndrome, and she said that she knew that that would become very difficult for me as I got older, and that she'd always be there to give me support when the time came. And unfortunately, she's now not going to be able to do that.
He truly symbolises
what selfless bravery is.
Chris Moon was applauded by Diana in March for his work as an anti-landmine campaigner. He lost 2 limbs clearing mines in Mozambique.
I think tomorrow for everyone is going to be incredibly sad, and it'll be a very tragic day, but I think what's left is the future, and it's right to really make that in every way a fitting memorial, and to continue supporting the causes that she supported and just trying to make things a little better.
Through her life, Diana said she hoped she could make things a little better. Now it falls to those who received her help to continue her work. Caroline Kerr, News at 10.
There'll be full coverage of Princess Diana's funeral tomorrow here on ITV. GMTV will be on the air at 6 with the preparations, and I'll be here to present ITN's uninterrupted coverage of the funeral itself from 8:30 through to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That's the funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales, on ITV from 8:30 tomorrow morning. And now, coming up on this uninterrupted News at 10 tonight, the rest of the day's news, including after yesterday's bombings, Israel suffers another devastating blow to the peace process. And the Olympics are going home, jubilation as Athens wins the Games. But first, the death was announced this evening of a woman who was an inspiration to Princess Diana and who became a close friend, Mother Teresa. She was 87. Mother Teresa, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, was seen by millions as a saint who devoted her life to the sick and the poor of Calcutta. Lawrence McGinty reports.
The shock of Mother Teresa's death swept through people leaving Westminster Cathedral tonight after a special mass for the Princess of Wales.
Both of them, I think, have left us an important legacy, which is to be concerned for each other, and especially those who are much in need. And in the case of Mother Teresa, particularly, she had this tremendous feeling for life, the value of life, and anything which destroyed life, whether it was in war or in abortion, was absolutely abhorrent to her.
Both women belonged to the world. Both had gained that position through their compassion. Here, Mother Teresa in Beirut, her care for the poor and sick the world over earned her the love of millions. But it was in India, she said, more than 40 years ago, she heard the divine call. The Pope allowed her to leave her order and start a mission to teach slum children. Later came the Pure Heart Clinic. Mother Teresa and her helpers gathered the dying from the gutters of Calcutta to give them dignity in death. It was this work that, in the eyes of the world, made her a saint. On a visit to Britain, she was shocked by the number of people sleeping on the streets.
It was so painful to see that they too are children of God.
She was close to the Pope, even, it's said, his private emissary on occasion. Tonight, he said he was deeply hurt and pained by her death. Her work goes on. Sister Nirmala
has never seen anything like it and probably never will again. These are the pictures from along the processional route. People have been pouring into the centre of London all week and since before dawn, and this is the result. Estimates before today of how many people are on the streets and in the parks range from at least 1 million, possibly as many as 5. We crossed to Hyde Park, and these are the scenes there. The south side of Hyde Park, of course, is on the extended route of the funeral procession now that the coffin is leaving from Kensington Palace. And the other change, a modern touch that has drawn the crowds to Hyde Park, is the positioning there of 2 huge screens so people can be part of the events and yet also watch the service on television. Hyde Park has, of course, been used for big events before. Remember the VE Day anniversary celebrations 2 years ago. Remember, too, Pavarotti in the Park in 1991 when the rain came down on him and the Princess. He's due to be at the service today. And Princess Diana was, of course, in the park on that day. We move now to Westminster Abbey, where, as we've seen, people have been queuing for days to get the best view, to be close to their princess, the people's princess. And it's here, in less than an hour, that the great doors of the cathedral will open, and the congregation will start taking their places. Diana's family, the Spencers, the royal family, guests from the worlds of show business and charity work, and hoping for a glimpse the thousands crammed into the streets around this historic Abbey building.
Still, as John Suchet said, amazing scenes, and we've seen them throughout the week. My guests in the studio this morning are Hugo Vickers and Robert Lacey, and they're watching those pictures with me, watching some of the events unfold this morning. Hugo Vickers, it's extraordinary that in a television age, there's so many people still wanting to be part of the event. They could sit at home and watch it all on TV.
Oh, I think there's a very strong feeling that it's important to see the coffin. It's almost a primeval feeling just to make the tragic events of the past week suddenly become real. That's what people have been saying to me outside in the streets.
Robert Lacey, is that your view?
Yes, I mean, it's sad, but it's also a celebration, and I think it's a defining moment for a new sort of Britain, a new, softer, more compassionate place.
And the extraordinary thing as well is that people have been talking about the nature of the crowds. The humanity of Diana was seen in the boundaries crossed in everywhere, in every case. People of different nationalities, people from all over the world, all wanting to be there to pay their tribute to her.
Yes, you can't define the crowds.
You can see the crowds now.
The crowds are not definable as such. I mean, every possible age, every possible country is represented, and there have been long vigils, people queuing for a very long time, but there's been a contentment in the vigil. And if, as occasionally is necessary, somebody has to brush through the crowds, they let you pass. They're very, very, as I say, contented and kind crowd.
Most of these people have been here all night. I was up 1 o'clock this morning in Kensington Gardens. It was an extraordinary scene. People gathered round the trees. It was like, well, Kensington Gardens has Peter Pan's statue there, and it was like Peter Pan's magic forest. Every tree was illuminated with candles. There were messages.
At Canada Gate there now.
That's it, outside the palace. And people were, as Hugo said, gentle and soft and obviously feeling very personally what was going on.
That's right. We were talking about Diana's humanity, and we were talking about the fact that people were queuing outside the Abbey certainly for 2 or 3 days now.
Yes, I've thought a lot in the past week about what it was that made her unique, and I feel that really what everybody has detected is the fact that she had a very good heart. That was what gave her the natural affinity she had with the sick, with the young, and with the old, and that's what people have detected in her, and that's why I think they feel so very, very strongly towards her.
And there we can see some of the floral tributes at Westminster Abbey, and now across the street there, some of the crowds. Robert Lacey, still amazing scenes as John Suchet was describing.
Yes, she was a soft-hearted person, and she was also a vulnerable person, wasn't she? And I think that's what everybody's responding to as well. She was someone who wasn't afraid to make clear her imperfections and face up to them and try and battle them. And it's that courage.
And that will be reflected. That will be reflected in the funeral service, won't it?
Yes, it will. Stoicism, of course, will be the order of the day in Westminster Abbey. Of course, we've had this controversy this week about the right way to show grief, whether the royal family's traditional way is the right way, whether breaking down and crying in public is the right way, and I think it'll all be resolved today in those crowds and in the Abbey.
But all these people, Hugo, they just want to be part of it, they just want to be there, they want to hear the service, they want to enjoy it, don't they?
Yes, I think there are no rules today. I think however anyone wants to respond to it will be accepted absolutely as natural. I think it will be the most extraordinary thing we've ever seen, probably.
For the time being, Hugo Vickers and Robert Lacey, thank you very much indeed. In among the crowds, every individual, every family, has each its own special reason for wanting to be part of today's remarkable event. The Williams family from the Rhondda Valley in Wales remember the day 15 years ago when the princess met their son Hugh, then just a few days old, in the maternity ward of their local hospital. Norman Rees reports on their journey to London.
We are all God's children good. This is what we pray.
In the Rhondda Valley, they're remembering their princess.
They're all aware that Princess Diana has died. Their opinions vary from her being a very caring person, a very kind person, a very loving person who has done a lot of good work throughout the world.
Keith Williams is head teacher at the Wattstown Primary School, and he has a particular reason to remember Diana. His wife Dawn and mother Joan share this special bond. They went together to sign the Book of Remembrance at the village library, and it brought back memories. Memories from 16 years ago, when Diana went to the local maternity unit and met Dawn with Hugh, her newborn baby son.
Some were quite nervous and apprehensive about it, but I must be honest, I enjoyed it, enjoyed the day. And but as soon as she came through the doors, everything seemed so relaxed, and because she just looked and said, "Oh, babies," and we headed to the first bed there, and it was just so nice. It was so pleasant, and she just lit up the room.